Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission for Wednesday, June 14th, 2022. I'm going to open the meeting at 7:30. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have roll call, please?
Mr. Fitzer? Here. Mr. Hara? Mr. Kucera?
Here.
Mr. Nushai?
Here.
Ms. Redmond?
Here.
Mr. Sinaki?
Here.
Mr. Tinlin? Mr. Watson?
Here.
Mr. Yell? We have quorum, Chair.
We have quorum. Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any problems with the agenda as it stands? Seeing none, we don't have to vote or anything. We'll just approve it as is. I'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is approval of the regular meeting minutes from May 11, 2022.
I make a motion to approve the regular minute meetings from May 11th, 2022.
Support.
Motion support. Anybody see any changes or anything that they didn't like? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Sinaki?
Yes.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer?
Yes.
Mr. Kucera?
Yes.
Mr. Nushai?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Agenda item number 6 is public discussion, items not on the agenda. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak? We don't really have any public. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I will close public discussion. And we will move on to agenda item number 7, which is consideration of a request for a new awning at 278 East 14 Mile Road, which is the Old Port Restaurant. And Mr. Tangieri, you want to start us through this?
Hello. The awning company had planned to be here, but I think they got the date mixed up, so they may not be. They were going to log in, but I'm not sure that they had the right date. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. This is a pretty basic thing. The letter is obviously really short. So they're requesting to place 2 new retractable awnings on the front of Old Port. That's at 278 East 14 Mile. We have a note in our ordinance that per section 34, 6.1.K.2.C, new awnings require review and approval by the Planning Commission. If you were replacing awnings, that's an administrative approval, but new awnings require approval by the Planning Commission. So, as noted, these are retractable. They're meant to shade the outdoor dining area in front of the restaurant, which was added with municipal administrative approval in 2021. And the awnings are located entirely on private property, so there's no encroachment into like the right of way or anything like that. We find them to be fully compliant with the zoning ordinance, and we do recommend approval. There are images of the awnings. You can see the building now, and then without the awning, and then with the awnings. And I guess if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I have no problem at all. I think it's a great addition to the thing. However, assuming what he's done with his building, with all the plants and decorations that he does around there, there's no chance of putting advertising or signage on these things, right?
It wouldn't be permitted, no, not at this sign. And if you wanted to put a sign on an awning, he'd have to come in for a sign permit. These don't really present a vertical
There's
or
just a small
diagonal
flap
surface.
in the front.
Yeah.
That you could.
The drip line would be the only thing that he could put a sign on, and he'd have to come in for permission to do that. So at this point, he's not planning to do that, and he couldn't really put anything on top of it because it just faces the sky. So.
Right. Anyone else have any questions for Joe? If everybody's happy with it, I would entertain a motion to approve it.
I'll make a motion to approve the request for a new awning on 278 East 14 Mile Old Port Inn.
Support.
And a motion, support. Can I have roll call, please?
Ms. Redmond.
Yes.
Mr. Sinaki.
Yes.
Mr. Watson.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer.
Yes.
Mr. Kucera.
Yes.
Mr. Nushai.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Agenda item number 8 is discussion of the sign ordinance amendments.
Yes, I will just stay here. So, a couple years ago, before a number of other things came up and started monopolizing our time, we started to work on a kind of reorganization and update to the city sign ordinance. The City of Clawson sign ordinance is a separate ordinance from the zoning ordinance. And the reason for that, it was once in the zoning ordinance. The reason that it's a separate ordinance is that when it was redone a number of years ago, about a decade ago, there was a provision put in there. It's called amortization. You could also call it a sunset provision for non-conforming signs. And in order to enforce a provision like that, it has to be in your general code of ordinances. It cannot be in a zoning ordinance because the zoning ordinance under state law is not retroactively enforceable. So that's why we deal with nonconformities all the time. And so we have this separate sign ordinance. And sign ordinances, signs is a changing landscape, right? It changes all the time. The technology changes. The lighting technology has changed a lot in the last 10 years. It's gone from being a wide variety of different types of fixtures to all LED, for instance. And, you know, trends change with time too. What people want out of their signs changes. What a community wants out of signs and it's within its boundaries changes as well. So it's good to look at one of these every so often. And you know, we're coming up on, I think it's been a little over a decade since the sign ordinance was seriously looked at. So it's time. And you know, we found some organizational things that could be improved, and we talked about those a couple years ago. And I can give you the new outline that we came up with. But tonight, what I've done is I've presented several sections of the ordinance for your review. And after we get through these, I'll present some more sections. And we'll probably do this over the course of 3 or 4 meetings. And of course, if you have substantial changes, that might add a meeting too. I don't think we're looking to necessarily make major changes to the effect of the ordinance, like in terms of sign sizes and things like that. But we might be looking at providing a little bit more flexibility within the sizes that we're allowing, things like that. I put a little bit of information about Reed v. Gilbert, which was a Supreme Court decision that's like 7 years ago now, that struck down a sign ordinance that was enacted by the town of Gilbert, Arizona, that more strictly limited the size, placement, and duration of signs for special events than for other similar signs with different content. And they ruled that that was an unconstitutional content-based restriction of speech. So ever since then, we've been looking for ways to regulate temporary signs in a way that is content neutral. And right now, the sign ordinance lists real estate signs and all these other types of signs that are all temporary signs, but it lists them by type and it regulates them slightly differently. So one of the things that we'll be talking about tonight is that approach that we've taken in several other communities and we're introducing tonight to regulating temporary signs in a way that's content neutral. But in general, we've got some goals here. So one, updating and clarifying the provisions, adding or subtracting as necessary, moving to a framework that doesn't regulate signs by content, reorganizing the ordinance slightly to present information in a more user-friendly order, Amending the substance of regulations is necessary to modernize, to close some gaps, to better support the intent of the ordinance, to respond to some situations that we've been dealing with, that the Zoning Board of Appeals, as Ed well knows, has been dealing with as well. And then to better incorporate city center signs into the sign ordinance. Because right now they're just sort of a floating chunk of it, and they don't connect to much else. So that brings us to draft amendments. Now, we have a purpose and intent statement in the ordinance right now, and what I've done is I've reworked that. For one thing, right now it's like a big paragraph, and to make it a little more parsable, I've broken it out into this 9-bullet structure so that people can quickly see, all right, so here's the basic intent of the ordinance, and then they can read more details about each of those intents, as they want to, basically. But it opens up by just saying, well, here's what it is. It's an ordinance to regulate signs, and we're trying to ensure that they're located, designed, constructed, installed, and maintained in a way that protects life, health, morals, property, and public welfare. Protecting public safety, protecting aesthetic quality of districts and neighborhoods, protecting free speech, reducing conflict among signs and light between public and private information systems, business identification, allowing for adequate business identification, fostering economic development, recognizing unique areas, so for instance, the city center, and then discontinuing non-conforming signs, which is a carry forward from the last sign ordinance, which we discussed that a couple years ago when we started talking about signs before we put it on hold. And it was determined at the time that we wanted to carry that forward, and we're going to have a dedicated discussion on non-conforming signs and how to handle that after we get through the rest of the sign ordinance. So we won't talk about that tonight, but for right now, it's a carry forward, and we will have a more detailed discussion on it later. Next section sets forth definitions for signs. You can see there's a couple modifications in there. Blade sign, we're just going with projecting sign. From ground sign, we've gone to freestanding sign. There's a couple just minor terminology changes. And partly, blade sign was just a redundant term to projecting sign in the ordinance the way it's written right now. So we don't really need both terms. Let's just use one and then be consistent with it. And moving from there into the general regulations, we've added a general applicability statement, which is not in the ordinance right now. That's the underlined text at the beginning, item A. And just saying, this applies in these circumstances. And then when we get to sign permits, we have a list of signs that don't require a permit. And the current language is very paragraphy and dense, and we're trying to simplify it a little bit to more of a list. And there are a couple things that speak a little bit to content, like political signs, garage sale signs, and things like that. That we're trying to get away from that because of Gilbert versus Reed. So those are now dealt with under temporary signs. So they've been removed from this list with specific standards that go with them. And directional signs also have their own section that applies to them. So the content that talks about how to do it has been removed here, and we just have directional signs listed as not requiring a permit, but then we actually have some standards for them later on. And then there's a bit about gasoline service stations and some of the little signs and badges and things that go all over the pumps. And we're moving that to some standards in the zoning ordinance for gas stations that will address the pumps and everything that goes with them and how the Planning Commission can regulate that.
Hey, Joe, question on that. And I see where it says here, no video screens or TV shall be permitted outside of the gas station tenant. So that means on the pumps themselves? We don't.
Exactly, yeah.
And is that, that's something just for Clausen, then? That's something we put specifically for us?
That's something Clausen has in its ordinance, yeah. That gas station TV or whatever that you see when you get gas at a lot of places, that's not permitted in Clausen at the moment,
Okay.
yeah.
Because?
Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly what the conversation around that was at the time it was adopted. I mean, I can think of a few reasons. Noise is the primary reason because everything in Clausen is next to or near residential, and those gas station TV modules can actually be fairly loud if their volume's not properly controlled. There's one not too far from my house in Berkeley that I would not want to be living next to because you would be hearing that little like baseball highlight commercial for Smart Water, whatever is playing on there pretty much all day long. So if you were ever to permit them, you would definitely want to have some volume controls and enforceability on the potential nuisance aspects of them.
What about areas that, because, if you think about that, I don't even know where it is. I think it's an Exxon station at 14 Mile, right near Three Cats Cafe. Yeah, they back right up to a resident. But if you go down to the Speedway down the street, there's really no residents within a certain distance, so could it be adjusted to say, hey, if you don't have residents within a certain distance, Citgo up at 14 in Rochester, I think they would fall into that where there's no residents around them.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely have an adjacency standard, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. But we can talk about that when we put it in the zoning ordinance too. Like, what do we want to do with this? Do we want to permit some of these or not?
I recall in the past when we were discussing these, I think the only thing we have in town now is the restaurant here, Main Street Kitchen, that has a drive-up outside with a speaker system on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there was discussions as to what the volume level of that should be. It's not bothersome by any means, but I don't know if the Clausen Police were supposed to get a special meter and stand so far away and listen to the volumes.
Yeah, that's how you would measure the sound at the property line. Is you would have a decibel meter. It's not just decibels. It's
There's some acoustic name to it.
yeah. There's it's a modification of the decibel. That's the standard now.
Sones.
What's that?
Sones. S-O-N-E-S.
That's
Yeah.
Sones, yeah. I know Mojave, when they moved in years ago, they decided to open up a party out in the back parking lot, and there was a lot of concern about having a band out there and too much noise level. And we tried to set some type of a standard for that, as to, that they couldn't get too loud, too carried away.
Yeah, and for something like that, hours come into play too. Hours of operation.
Yeah.
I guess as we get into it, I would just recommend that if we have something is unique, and maybe gas station TV is unique for Clausen, that we put somewhere in our official documentation why.
Why? Yeah, I
Because-
understand that. Yeah.
If not, then you get people coming to the ZBA saying, why can't have a gas station TV? Everybody else has a gas station TV, and why can't we? And then if you say, because we are so closely bound and so near residential that the noise annoyance is almost impossible to control, so that therefore we just say in our city, the answer is no because.
Sure. Yeah.
And that would be very helpful.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that.
Doesn't, Joe, do you, so when reading about Reed versus Gilbert, right? It seems like that's open to challenge as well, right? Like just the gas station. I mean, giving preference to one thing versus another, like I enjoy hearing football games and baseball games from my backyard, very much so. I would not want to hear a gas station, right? But giving preference to that type of sound versus another sound and restricting their ability to advertise maybe and make money would seem like it kind of puts us in a weird spot, right? If I'm understanding how the Reed, move forward in their restricting the content, because that would be a content issue, advertising versus baseball game.
Sure. But we are still allowed to regulate the time, place, and manner of things, and I would say that video is a manner of presenting information.
Okay.
And so if we did not want video, if we didn't want animated signs, for instance, we could still say that.
So it would be video and not sound necessarily, right?
Right.
Or
Well,
both.
the sound too, because you're still allowing for expression and you're still allowing for advertising and things.
Oh, okay.
But you're just not allowing it to be done through audio-visual means, essentially.
With that said, as we move through this, is there going to be a point that the attorney is present for specific
Oh, yeah,
questions?
he'll definitely give it his review, and if you'd like him at a meeting, we can invite him to come to the meeting too.
Okay.
And why, yeah, so I'm thinking like, why is a restaurant that backs up right next to a neighborhood? And I know they have volume control also, they have
Sure.
to monitor that, but if I'm a gas station, why, if I'm in the same proximity to neighborhood that fast food restaurant is, but yet they've got this, sound system
Speaker
that,
box, yeah.
okay.
All right, so the next item is permit required. So here's the signs you need a permit for. And we have really 3 different types of signs that you need a permit for. Wall signs, freestanding signs, and temporary signs of a certain size. We talk about the application itself. Right now, the ordinance doesn't really specify what information needs to be submitted with a sign application. So we're specifying that now. And the rest of the permit stuff is pretty much the same as it is now. I added a clarifying line at the beginning of the part that addresses how the Planning Commission looks at signs. Just noting that this is when it's proposed at the time of application for site plan approval. Prohibited signs, we have a pretty extensive list of prohibited signs. I tried to simplify it and kind of knock it down to the essence of the actual list that we've got now. A few of these things are just covered elsewhere in the text. For instance, it's a given that a sign that's not permitted is prohibited. So we don't need to say that it's prohibited. We're like with our zoning ordinance, it's done through affirmative permission.
Joe, can I ask a question? And I don't want to vary too far from your path here, but what would be, I had a hard time going through this. In really all the things that you crossed out, right, are things that we're going to omit in our proposed new one.
That's language that would come out. A lot of those things are still going to be regulated. They're just not going to be regulated as they are now.
Have the difference between doing it this way versus doing it in a way that addresses the type of sign, is there an advantage to doing it this way versus breaking it down by types of sign and zoning, like the areas on the zoning map?
Well, so signs that require a permit have some other sections that we're not seeing tonight that regulate them. Right now, the city regulates those by the stretch of street that you're on, what street frontage you're on.
Okay.
And we didn't have a plan to change that because we have a lot of areas of the city where there's like a lot of zoning districts, like right in a row along a major street. So regulating by the stretch of street actually leads to more uniformity than regulating by zoning district would. And the one thing that doesn't really cover very well at the moment is when you get into the neighborhoods and you're on like secondary streets. And the only things that are going to have signs there are things like churches and stuff. But right now, I think that could be handled a little bit better, so we're working on how to handle that.
Well, it would seem like you could easily adjust to modify for churches and schools and things like that, just in the way we do in our overall zoning, right? But
Right.
I'm confused about what you're saying. So we literally, and I know at city council, they just talked about a certain correction in the sign zoning.
Right.
But, so we're literally, it seems complicated not to make it, if it's gonna transition, it would transition just in the way that our master plan would transition in our zoning ordinance, no? Like if you're talking about like city center and the crossroad of Main and 14 and the transition as you hit crossroads, it seems like that also would fit into the zoning ordinance and how we transition into residential. I thought it was kind of complicated and hard to wrap my head around, but maybe it's just me. Trying to place everything. Right?
Sure. I think maybe when you see the full ordinance together, because there's sections you're not seeing yet,
Okay.
it might make a little more sense.
Okay. And there were also things, sorry again, but like, are we looking at this through the eyes of like, a lot of things that I was seeing about it and reading about it was, parsing out commercial versus non-commercial content versus, and so like keeping things like holiday displays, which I noticed was like the only thing that wasn't scratched out in page 6 or whatever. Wouldn't those be kind of, according to what we're addressing here, the read, kind of a liability in terms of basing signs on content, or no?
Holiday displays are just not regulated at all. We're not going to be telling people what to put up for holiday displays.
Of course not. Of course not. But that's, and again, I'm no expert. I've only watched a couple of videos, but that's why, if you've got an inflatable Santa or you have an inflatable wobbly guy out in front of a, car dealership, from my understanding, that's where challenges get brought up. And I didn't know if we were going too far, if I'm too far in the weeds, that's okay. You can just tell me. If we're, taking baby steps, that's okay too.
Right. So, I mean, in the past, distinctions have been drawn between holiday displays and signage. So I think we're on solid ground there.
Okay.
But yeah, the two-man.
Right. I mean, you could argue that, right?
Right. That would be considered an inflatable sign, yeah. Yes, and they are prohibited, yeah. Let's see. So we have a thing about motor vehicle signs in here that just kind of elaborates on how those are permitted. It gives a few more kind of reasonable exceptions for when you're in the course of doing business.
So motor vehicle signs, we're talking about those trucks that pull a sign.
No, we're talking about like, your pickup truck for your business where it says like, it's got a big sign that says, John's
The dog
Home
place
Goods or
on
whatever.
Rochester has one out front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you're saying they are permitted or they are not permitted?
They are permitted under certain circumstances, yeah, yeah.
They're permitted, Scott, what it says is that you're not allowed to be at the street all day long, like alternate signage.
Got it.
Course of doing business, if
Right.
they're loading, unloading, whatever they're doing, absolutely, but. to
But you
leave it-
can't park in front of the business and just leave it there all day.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Makes
also
sense.
can't have it on like an unregistered trailer or something that's just sitting there. Or an unregistered vehicle for that matter. You get a box truck and put a sign on the side of it and it just sits there all the time and it's not registered, then that's a problem.
Number 18, under their portable signs. Signs that people just, like, they can be put up and taken down that day, correct? Is that what falls under that?
Yeah, I mean, a sign that would be, actually, I have to make sure I get that section reference correct there. I'll highlight that while I'm thinking about it.
What page are you on, Scott?
It's number 18, but it's under section C, I think.
Page 9.
Page 9, okay.
Yeah, so it's signs that are designed to be able to be moved. Let me see if we define that, actually. So I can add a definition for it if we don't have one. Yeah, we have a definition of portable sign. I thought we did. Sign that is freestanding, not permanently anchored or secured to a building, and not having supports or braces permanently secured in the ground, including but not limited to sandwich signs, A-frame signs, inverted T signs, and signs mounted on wheels so as to be capable of being pulled by a motor vehicle. We do actually have a carve out for A-frame signs, which is included here. And that's what it's saying, except as provided in that section 3612.
So they're prohibited,
Yeah.
but yet they're used pretty frequently. So people just put them out and just take a chance, or?
Are you talking about A-frames, like the little
Yeah,
side?
yeah.
No, we actually do permit those. Those are the one type of
Okay.
portable sign that we are permitting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but what we're trying to avoid is the person with the, the big sign on a trailer, parking it, daily or just leaving it for months. That's
Okay.
really the main thing that we're trying to avoid there.
And do we have control over how many of those signs one can put on their lawn?
How many?
Portable
A-frames.
signs, A-frames stick in the ground. On the way here.
Be
the-
temporary, right?
Yeah, so an A-frame, there's regulations. I'll get to it in a little bit, but there are regulations for A-frame signs here.
For residential?
No, for
No, we're talking-
Are you
in
talking about
commercial
on your
areas.
lawn?
No, on businesses.
Commercial.
Oh, on business.
Yeah, like on the
okay.
sidewalk, on the
I thought you were saying
sidewalk.
residential is
For
the
instance,
lawn.
Yeah.
for instance, on the way here, I passed Main Street Kitchen right here.
Mm-hmm.
They have their existing sign with their company name on it, and then they put up I call it a sandwich board, a two-sided
Yeah.
A-frame. And now they've also got 2 or 3 other signs. Drive-throughs open and 2 signs with their phone numbers on. It's just starting to look a little cluttered.
Yeah, they're supposed to be spaced a minimum of 50 feet apart under this set of regulations that I've got here. So the idea is you get one for a storefront.
And then do you have, sorry, but do you have an easement or like a setback on those too from like, with
From the
that in mind?
sidewalk?
From like the sidewalk, the community, I saw, the cafe did not have theirs in public walkway, but I could see how some companies, some businesses might bring it
Well,
forward.
Downtown, that's the only place to put it, right? Is in the public right
Well,
away.
not necessarily, because you have seating out there now, so it was nice and tucked back here, but I could see it where it's, blocking kind of the pedestrian flow.
Sure. Yeah, there is a minimum clearance around the sign that's required if it's on a sidewalk or within a public right-of-way. So that's designed to meet Americans with Disabilities Act standards.
A clearance to what?
A clearance
So-
around the sign, on the sidewalk. You have to have a clear area of the sidewalk that's 5 feet wide in order to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act standard.
Oh, so if there's like a light post, then it has to be 5 feet away from the light post?
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. So you can't stick it right in the middle and leave 3 feet on each side because that would be in violation.
But they technically could go all the way to the curb with it.
Yeah, I don't think we have a setback from the curb at the moment. No, at the moment, we do not have a setback from the curb.
Okay. Is there anything downtown that would make that an issue? No?
No, it hasn't been, no.
Okay,
And we've had A-frame signs for what, 3-4 years?
okay.
I mean, occasionally somebody steps theirs out, I mean, if you're
Joan, he
employed-
wants the microphone.
They can't hear you with.
If your employee puts it in the wrong place, we point out that that needs to be moved. That's not an issue.
Okay.
Can you hand me that cord, please? Right. So, I guess going back up, just to get through the rest of that, those general provisions. I've given you one example of an illustration here for measurement of sign area. There are others that are in the works that I'll be showing you when they're ready. Thank you. Yeah, there's this. Just noticed my battery's getting kind of low. But we've tried to make the measurement of wall sign area very clear, and the illustrations are obviously meant to make it clearer than, as clear as day. And then we'll put some more illustrations in there that kind of flesh out the other two paragraphs. Under locational standards, we did add a little, no sign shall be attached to any utility pole, tree, fence, screening wall, or curb. And that covers a couple of the items that were removed above under prohibited signs. Because a lot of that spoke to, you can't put any of these 28 things on any of these surfaces. Well, you can't put any signs on those surfaces, and that's really all we need to say.
Joe, do you think it's appropriate to separate like a mural from a wall sign, or not
Murals
so much?
are not covered under the sign ordinance. Going
Well,
forward,
it says mural it means a picture or photograph painted. For the purposes of this article, a mural is considered a wall sign. That's how it defines
Oh, yeah.
a mural.
Yeah, we're talking about actually taking that out of there. Thank you for pointing that out, because I want to make sure we address that. We've got some mural ordinances that we can fall back on. But yeah, I would like to get away from regulating them in the same way as signs.
You can get away from regulating. Those aren't considered signs legally.
Right, yeah, Jill's actually more of an expert on that than I am, but yeah, we can look at our approach to murals as part of this process.
Okay.
Right now, we don't have landscaping requirements for the basis of freestanding signs. Some people do it just because it looks better. But I've just added kind of a basic landscaping shall be provided around the base of any freestanding sign. Not trying to get too prescriptive with it, but we'd like some sort of treatment at the
Yeah,
I
I
the
think
sign to
that's
make
a
it
fair
look integrated
requirement.
into the sign, into the site.
Especially now that they're the monument type.
Yep.
I wouldn't see any reason we wouldn't do that.
Would you, devil's advocate, if it's, like Hungry Howie's, like there's kind of is on cement, would you allow them to put planter boxes around there as landscape potentially in that case?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
If you have a situation like that and you redo a sign like that, I think, yes, that would be a reasonable way to treat that.
Okay, so you said we'll develop that further, though?
If we want to, I was trying not to be too prescriptive. I was sort of trying to leave it open to say, do something at the base of the sign to integrate it into the site, but we're not going to say it has to have this many shrubs per foot
but
or
like-
whatever,
I don't know, zoning board? Landscape, would that mean that it has to be in the ground? Like, is there a definition to landscape that someone could go by that would give them flexibility and a planter box versus, breaking up
Yeah, I
concrete?
think a planter box could reasonably be
Yeah,
considered
I think we'd have to be
landscaping, yeah.
kind of descriptive, though, because landscape can mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah, that's my point.
Okay,
I
yeah.
agree.
Yeah, I would think that we'd want to give very specific details of what we'd require.
Yeah, we have several places around town now that buy the galvanized horse feeder.
No, I
water.
agree, but I just want to be able to maybe have that included here, because it's landscape.
Yeah, if they
It's
don't have
kinda
dirt, they can just put it in the large planter boxes. There's several of those around town. And they look good.
Okay, yeah, I can elaborate on that. That's not a problem.
Okay.
one item here under illumination that was discussed extensively a few years ago. Signs shall not be framed by LED light strings. We had some issues with that a couple of years ago where people were putting those LED light strings around the edge of a sign, and it was not well received around town. So we're just outright saying that's not an option.
I noticed in there it says flames cannot be used. Why? Why can't we use flames? I like the idea.
Open sparks. We have a little address thing here. All properties shall display a street address visible and legible from the public right-of-way. We don't have that anywhere in our ordinances right now that I could find, so I added that in, and that's a public safety thing. Substitution of non-commercial messages. So this is another Reed thing. Any sign permitted under this ordinance may contain either a commercial or non-commercial message. This is just something that we have to do based on the Reed decision.
You said this is something we have to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Joe, are we planning on defining commercial or non-commercial in our ordinance then?
The dictionary definition of commercial and non-commercial is generally sufficient. You don't typically have to define that in your ordinance.
For someone who checks back to make sure I'm following along, I think it might be helpful, but maybe that's just me.
Let's see.
And is that because, how is that determined by the Reed case, the commercial versus non-commercial?
I'm just trying to think about how to describe it.
Because of the content aspect
Yeah,
of
it
it?
really is the content aspect of it. Now, there is a more recent decision that allowed for a distinction to be made between on-premises and off-premises signs, and people are still figuring out how to parse that one in the context of Reed
Yeah.
because it doesn't really make any sense.
You can go down a rabbit hole, at least
Right.
in the video I saw about
Right.
it too, with the on-premise versus not on-premise.
Right.
Because, then you have to read the context to know if it's on-premise or not, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So it's kind of like, all right, Supreme Court, what are you trying to actually say here?
Right. Well, and that's why, at least in the things that I was seeing, doing it by the type of sign, at least in their opinion, was like the way to avoid the content base of
Right.
things versus the type of sign, the style of sign, right?
Versus the
But-
content of the sign,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah,
But-
type of sign is what we can regulate. It's
Right.
the content of the sign we can't.
Because
And
it gets really murky.
the off-premises thing was dealing more with like billboard type signs too. But it's probably going to take attorneys a little while to figure out how to deal with this most recent decision. It was literally like last month.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So it hasn't really worked its way through the thought process yet.
And what was the determination of that one again?
I'm not sure. I can't confidently sum it up at this point because I've only read it once. But yeah, it did provide some ability to make a distinction between an on-premises versus an off-premises sign, that wasn't the terms they used. It was accessory versus non-accessory sign was the term they used. But we're going to have a meeting internally, not next week, but the week after, to try to go through it and talk about what it means and bounce some things off of a couple of law firms that we work with in a lot of our communities. So I should have more to say about that in July than I do now. But it's a very fresh decision that probably just makes things more confusing, to be perfectly honest.
For sure, yeah.
But that's the way things go. We just got to figure out how to deal with it. And
Well, yeah, I mean, even the morale at the beginning, which I can appreciate, based on morals, I was like, oh, that kind of feels content-y to me and subjective,
Right,
but,
but
you know.
yeah, but then there's a long history of obscenity law that says that you
Right.
can prohibit certain things in a public display.
For
so,
sure, yeah.
So yeah, and that's what
It's-
we're leaning on. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's free speech is
Tricky?
tricky. Yeah. Well, you know, when the Constitution was written, none of this existed. I mean, there was just no. They didn't have any idea what an LED TV that you might put in the window of your store. Nobody thought about anything like that.
Life was simple then.
It was a much simpler landscape
Yeah.
at the time. You had a piece of carved wood that said "Ye Old Barber Shop," and you know, that's what it was. You know, so yeah, the landscape's a lot more complicated now, and of course, you didn't have electric illumination back then either. So the last thing in the general regulations is about legibility and design. So we have a minimum height of letters and numbers on a freestanding sign. This is based on some research that was done by a handful of universities 12 years ago. And it's since been actually adopted by some of the trade groups of the sign industry as a recommendation. So we feel like this is a pretty strong national standard that's actually supported by some data, that when you have roadways with these posted speeds, these are generally the letter heights that are going to be legible. Right now we have a 14-inch minimum letter height for signs, which is very large. It's more than a foot. And if you're only getting a 24 square foot sign, not a lot of those letters fit on that sign. And there's really, from the data that we've reviewed, there's no reason that they have to be that tall. 6 inches is plenty to read from a car, generally speaking, if you're going less than 45 miles an hour. So that's a fairly major change from the current standard. But this standard, we feel, is supported, it's recognized nationally, and it will give you what you need, basically. And it'll give people a little more flexibility of
3
design.
inches at 25 miles an hour. So you're saying that going down Main Street between 13 and 14 and up to, 14 and a half, their sign shouldn't be larger than 3 inches, the letters on it?
The letter shouldn't be smaller than 3 inches.
Shouldn't be smaller than?
Right.
Oh, okay, letters minimum. Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
I read that wrong, I
Yeah,
apologize.
so they should be a minimum of 3 inches tall, and that will allow people to read it easily.
And then, what's the maximum then?
We don't really have a maximum. If you've got a sign of a certain size and you want to make one letter really, really big, that's okay.
Okay.
That's up
As
to
long as we
you.
want- I thought I was reading it wrong. Thank you then.
Yeah, so it gives people a lot of flexibility in design, basically. The next thing is the A-frame signs, which are a type of temporary sign, of course, but we're calling them out as something that's treated a little differently. And we're allowing them in the city center, CMD and CR districts, so downtown, basically.
And can they leave them up 24/7?
They are supposed to be stored when the business is not open.
Okay.
Can I
So-
say that some real estate agents still use A-frame signs for open houses temporarily as that goes as well? I'm sure
Yes,
nobody's
and
going to come yell at them.
That would
but-
actually be allowed under the other temporary signage that you're
Okay.
permitted,
Yeah.
So here's where we get into the specific regulations for temporary freestanding and temporary wall signs. In fact, before I do that, because this is the most complex part of it, I'll just wanted to note that there's some maintenance standards at the bottom, and they're maintenance standards we've used in other communities, and they seem to have served us well. So if you have any questions about those, obviously, let's talk about it. But I just wanted to note that before we got into the temporary signs, because that's probably a bigger discussion. So when we look at the regulations for temporary freestanding and temporary wall signs. We have this table that talks about, what use category you're in. And we have single-family residential, multifamily residential, non-residential uses in the R1, R2, and RM districts. So those would be your places of worship and other limited uses that are permitted in residential districts. And then non-residential uses in all the other districts. And here, we can't say, that the sign is advertising something or is a real estate sign or is a political sign or is any other type of content on the sign. So what we're doing is we're saying, all right, we get a certain amount of square footage. Any individual sign can only be up to a certain amount of square feet. And what you do with your square footage is up to you. If you want to say save the whales, say save the whales. If you want to say hate has no home here, say hate has no home here. You have an allowance of a certain amount of temporary signage that you get at all times, and it expands during an election. And you get a little bit of extra as long as a property is listed for lease or sale. Of course, if I were trying to sell someone's house, I wouldn't want them to have political signs on the lawn, and I would probably tell them to put them away. So you're probably only going to get the real estate sign when the house is listed. But nevertheless, we are giving a little bit of extra allowance there. And now, if you've got a sign that's over 6 square feet per the permit requirements above, a temporary sign that's over 6 square feet, you're going to have to come in for a permit for it. So if you're, let's say you're a church and you want to stretch a big banner between 2 poles on your front lawn, or hang it on the side of the church or something, if it's more than 6 square feet, you come in for a permit for it. And we'll tell you, you can have this sign up for X number of days. And that's how long the permit's good for. If it's under 6 square feet, that's just considered ordinary expression, basically. You get a certain amount of expressive signage at all times. And you see it when you drive through neighborhoods. People have those little, like, in this home we celebrate, etc. And it's just out there. It's all the time. It's not like they put it out for a month and then they take it away for 30 days and then they put it out it's just out there. And we're trying to allow that to continue, but within reason. We don't want someone to have 24 of those, but they can have a couple of them, and that's probably fine. They might have a band booster one, and then they're in this house et cetera, and then something else on their lawn. And really, the whole idea here is to balance freedom of expression against clutter. Because we don't want clutter, but we do want freedom of expression. So we're trying to provide one while avoiding the other. And it's a tricky balancing
But shouldn't we be
act.
specific about, because you just said a couple, but a couple could mean 2 to me, it could mean 3 to the person next door.
Right.
Shouldn't we just set specific numbers and say you can have 2 or whatever the number is?
Well, don't they add up to be like 6 feet if you put 2 of them together? Is that what you're
right,
talking about?
yeah.
And-
So if we allow 10 square feet and you get 5 2-square-foot signs, right? Or if you had 3 square foot signs, then you'd get 3 of them because a 4th one would put you over 10 feet.
But who's going to go measure that, and who's going to keep track of that? Wouldn't it be easier to say a number of? Just that way it's easy, because I could say, hey, they've got too many signs, and then they measure all 4 of them, and they go, no, look down over 6 feet. I'm like, okay, I didn't know. But if you just said, you can have 2, you can have 3, you can have whatever number that we don't consider clutter,
Right.
wouldn't that be easier?
It would be easier, yes. The thing is, the way the Reed decision is written, it might actually be a little too restrictive to say 2 signs, because if someone wants to say a 3rd thing and they're staying within a reasonable total size, then they don't get to say the 3rd thing. And the way we're doing it here, we have a maximum amount of square footage, and you are free to determine how you use that square footage is basically the most content neutral way we can do it.
So you're saying there's some type of a law this is based on then?
It's a Supreme Court decision and interpretation of the First Amendment.
Yeah, Supreme Court, though. Are they
Yeah.
really that important? So then we can't do that. So we just literally can't. We can't say certain number and that's it. because
Right.
this
Saying a
decision-
certain
Okay.
number gets us a lot closer to regulating content than giving a square footage and letting people do whatever they want with that square
Okay,
footage.
as long as I know that we can't, then that's
Yeah.
fine.
Joe, how does sign cards play into this? You'll see, like, oftentimes, during special celebrations, people graduating from high school, they'll have big giant letters of congratulations
Sure.
spelled out across their lawn, or happy 30th birthday.
Sure.
Would that not be allowed?
I think you could make the argument that it's a holiday display, actually, especially if it's a birthday thing. I don't think it would fall under this, and especially given that those are typically out for a very short period of time. If someone left them out to the point where they were like deteriorating, we would be able to enforce on that under other provisions. But yeah, that kind of thing is generally going to be considered a holiday display. And you're allowed to have, kind of whatever expression you want on that. You can put as many lights up for Christmas as you want, that kind of thing. So it's a great question, but generally speaking, I think that would be viewed as something of an exception to this.
Okay.
Under your,
That's
excuse me 1 second. Under your temporary signs, your chart here, there's 4 notations saying not located on any roof. There's 4 places that shows up. Is this going to affect Old Port putting up his 4th of July thing? Or will we allow him to put it up for, say, a week and not a month?
It's also a holiday display.
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably not. In the same way that like somebody would be able to put an inflatable sleigh with reindeer on it in December on their house.
Yeah, he does that too. Yeah.
True, yes. But the idea is we're trying not to have signage on roofs. But yeah, his holiday displays are probably still going to be untouchable. Is my feeling on that.
We couldn't even limit the time that it's put up. I mean, 4th of July, it makes sense to put up, he has thank you veterans or something. It covers the entire roof with the American flag.
Right.
It's a nice display, but I mean, with a limited time, I would think. You don't want it up for 2-3 months at a time.
Right. It's really hard under the First Amendment to limit the amount of time for something like that. But you always do have the blight escape valve where if something starts to look shabby or deteriorate, then you can enforce on it as blight. That's probably your best fallback. But when it's a holiday display, it's really hard to put like a time limit on it or anything like that. It's just, I would worry about that from a legal perspective. Just
Well, couldn't you regulate through other sources that say if they're covering their roof vents or
Well,
other
yeah, I mean, if somebody's doing
aspects
something
to
like that,
things?
certainly,
Right, if
yeah.
it's covering their roof, it's probably covering their roof vents. There's other municipal codes that they might be breaking to cover that type of long-term.
Yeah, if it was a problematic thing where it was being left up for months or something, yeah, you probably could find other ways to deal with it, other avenues.
Would
Yeah.
you strongly suggest a limited time, not actually put an ordinance?
Well, yeah, that's the other thing is that you are free to talk to people and say, look, we've had this holiday display up for the 4th of July and it's August 28th and it's time to take it down. And you're not necessarily engaging in an enforcement action at that point so much as a suggestion or a request.
Right.
But that kind of communication from the city is perfectly acceptable. So yeah, if it is a problem at some point, then that's probably the first thing to
All
try.
of these are taken care of by our code enforcement, correct?
Right.
Like number 9, here's temporary signs shall not be placed in a public right of way, and I see them popping up quite often.
Sure, yeah. Most often that's like a garage sale or something. It's pointing people to a garage sale, and you're still going to get that. You're absolutely going to get that. The thing is, a garage sale lasts a day, 2 days, 3 days, maybe.
And couldn't that be directional then at that point?
Yeah.
Or no?
Well,
I
not
mean, it's
really,
pointing
yeah.
towards the direction.
And they're not supposed to attach balloons to it.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to do it?
Attach
But,
balloons. We're going to take all the fun out of it.
You know, your code enforcement people can go around and literally take those out of the ground because they're not supposed to be there. So if somebody has a garage sale on Saturday and they don't go pick up their signs, your code enforcement officer can pick it up on Monday if they happen to drive past it. That's really how you have to deal with that. You're always going to get little pop-up things like that, and it's just part of normal life, really. And people are going to advertise their garage sales, and they're going to forget to go get their signs, and you just have to enforce on it when you see it, basically. But yeah, if it's in the right of way, it's fair game to just remove.
Right of way or a city easement, right? Like when,
Yeah, if it was in a city easement, it could also be removed because that's city property. So, or the city has the right to use that property. So,
I know,
yeah.
Ed, did you have a question? Because I have one before we move too far.
Well, Joe said something with respect to square footage that I don't know if I understood correctly. Because I've had this with several organizations. They want to do something. Is Oktoberfest a holiday? You know?
Yeah, right.
Because then if I consider Oktoberfest a holiday, then we don't have to come in to do this stuff. But what if your area is expansive? You know, there's a lot of proportional things. So
Right.
where's the cheat sheet that says for most characteristic things that people want to do, you hand it to them and say, and then where is it defined that you can come in and ask for a temporary
the whole
for
case.
something that exceeds?
That's the whole case, though, isn't it? The content?
Yeah, right.
That's the whole problem. You can't really, right? You're not supposed to regulate against content,
Oh,
so.
no, I'm saying if you wanted more signs or a slightly larger sign, because your social hall is in a residential neighborhood and, you know, you got this information, you want to display it. And so how do people come for a temporary? Do they have to go before the zoning board? Do they have to come before the planning commission?
It's done like other signs under the current way it's written. It's an administrative thing. So if they're a bar and they want to put up a 12 square foot Oktoberfest sign, they would come here and say, here's our sign. Can we have a permit for this temporary sign? And the city would say, yes, it meets our 12 square foot standard. It's not in the right of way. It looks like you're doing things according to the ordinance. Yes, we will give you a permit for 64 days of display time.
So that they would just come to the city clerk?
Building department, yep,
Building department.
yep.
And so where in our ordinance does it talk about that anything that is not specifically stated can be applied for at the building department?
That's up in the general regulations, really section B, subsection B. And it looks like there's 2 Bs. So it should be subsection C, and the prohibited sign should be D. The ordered list got screwed up.
Well, you don't have to find it now,
It's on
but
page 15. Yep, at the bottom of 15.
15 of the packet. Yeah, it's page 6 of the memo.
Yeah, 15 of the packet.
I have 13 pages.
I only have 13 pages.
Right? That's what I was like, what am I missing?
The packet's
on 15
22
on mine.
pages. Huh, yeah, it's in there though.
Control F?
Keep going that way.
No?
Keep going up. Going. One more page. There it is. Go back to where you just were. Joe, question in regards to, so I see the obscenity thing that's for business signs. I'm assuming all of this is applicable to home signs also.
Oh, yeah, the obscenity
So you can't
prohibition
have
would
words on there
definitely.
that are that,
Yes.
okay.
My neighbor is no. Yeah, you can't, that we would be able to enforce on.
All right, Joe, am I understanding, so I'm going back to kind of where we were, my page is page 12, where it talks about the duration of the temporary signs, including 7, building and land on a zoning lot listed for lease. Now, especially in commercial, a lot of those do not sell within 90 days. Am I reading that right, that after 90 days, they're not allowed to have their commercial for sale or lease sign? Because the
Right.
bump place, I think of the chicken place.
So it goes on to say, when all or a portion of a building or land area on a zoning lot is listed for sale, the maximum display time of freestanding temporary signs for all uses and temporary signs mounted on buildings for all uses except residential uses shall be the duration of the duration the building unit or land is listed for sale.
Oh, this-
So as
okay.
long as it's listed for sale,
As long
you
as-
can
okay.
have a sign that say that.
Sorry,
you can
I
have that
misread that.
sign.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, so yes, we absolutely want to give people the ability to advertise that their property is
Of
for
course,
sale
but
or
that's
lease.
tricky too, right? With the
Right.
content thing.
Well, that's why we're saying it in such a weird roundabout way.
Okay,
you
that's
know?
why- okay.
When it's listed, you can have extra sign, so it's a game we're playing at this point, essentially, to say, you can have a real estate sign without saying you can have a real estate sign.
Right, yeah, and the attorney will look this all over, right?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah. And most of this language has been reviewed by attorneys in other communities
Oh, it has?
already as
Oh,
well.
okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, this has been through a number of different attorneys, not just in Michigan, actually. This language was just tested in North Dakota, too, so.
This exact language was tested in?
Not necessarily exactly, because the numbers change, but the basic language that you're seeing here, the way we're treating it, yeah, that's the way we've been doing it, and it's in a number of ordinances now in the area, and like I said, we've even used it in outside of Michigan, and it's passed legal review in all those places. So.
A legal review, but not, like, it's not been tested in
Oh
court,
no,
right?
we haven't been sued or anything.
Right, well, and I
but we're
thought-
trying to set ourselves up not to get sued.
Right, well, and when I was listening to one of the seminars on it, it was talking about, like, if cities undergo a lawsuit, they have to pay the attorney fee for the other.
Right, if they lose,
whatever
yeah,
it
they
is.
have to pay
Yeah.
attorney fees.
So it
for
seems
whoever
like
they get
it's only
sued
to
by.
people's advantage to challenge these things, right?
Yeah.
So when I was going through it, I was thinking of the city and how one might challenge, like, for instance, prohibited signs. When I see it talks about animated parts, images, movement causing mechanical, I think, again, I don't have an issue with this, but I could see some opportunity to challenge even the art store on 14 Mile, where they've got a lot of art things out front.
Oh,
where
sure.
someone could argue that that's a sign that they're able to promote, just like a gas station might have certain things out. But we're doing basic, like, we're not looking to go that far into regulating things, right?
Yeah, I mean something like the art place having a little outdoor display, I would not enforce on that as a sign. I think that gets you a little over the line in terms of, because it doesn't really meet the definition of sign necessarily. So Yeah, you're gonna get your outdoor display and things like that. An outdoor display, it does call attention to a property, of course, but it's not signage as is defined in this ordinance. So
You'll get to it sometime, but we do have a problem. In my experience with zoning board, or with the ZBA, in that a freestanding building with traffic and parking all around it,
sure,
4 sides. It could be a large building, it could be a small building. It has the same square foot regulation as a shopping center where businesses are rowed one to the other, and they only have a frontage because their back is not, their back is loading, unloading,
Yeah.
it's not for the public. So every
Yes.
business, and this will come up on Thursday
on Thursday. Yep.
at the ZBA, that a business wants 3 or 4 wall faces with signage.
That's correct.
And
yes.
then the other thing that I found, and you could go with that clock up there, because of the large size, that clock might be proportional, but it might look really, really small if that wall was only the size of the center section. And we've had that,
Sure.
the first sign on the 14-mile frontage for, Noble Appliance, was to code. And it looked like an afterthought
It's
because
tiny.
there was a very, very large store frontage with a very unproportional sign, and then you went 400 feet down the road, and there was a sign in a different district done at a different time that the whole blasted front of it
This is a giant
was,
sign. Yeah.
was the name of the business. And yeah, things have changed, but how are we addressing proportionality?
So that's going to be our next sign discussion, in fact, when we start talking about the size and number regulations. And I completely agree with you that the way it's done right now is a little too one size fits all. And right now we have a 1 sign limit. So if you're a pharmacy, let's say, where you typically, it's customary for a pharmacy to have a sign that says the name of the pharmacy and another smaller sign that says whatever, prescription pickup or whatever it happens to say. So when you're forcing them into the 1 sign per building box, suddenly they're not able to do something that is customary in their industry, right? And that goes for car dealerships and all kinds of other businesses, right? So the 1 sign per facade standard really doesn't work for most freestanding businesses. Now, the way that we tend to address it is to provide a maximum square footage, and it's often that scales with the size of the building. And so you have a size of the facade, and then you get a certain square footage that is on a sliding scale with the size of the facade. And you are allowed to divide that square footage among multiple signs if you want to. Maybe we have an upper limit on the number of signs so we don't just get a ton of little tiny things all over the place. And then if you've got a second facade that is facing a street, typically you get a bonus for that. I don't see a lot of ordinances with a bonus for facades that face like a parking lot or other things like that. But there's certainly ways you can do that just by not limiting it to 1 per building, right? Because we've had a few variance cases come in where, a pharmacy wanted, I think, a total of 4 wall signs or something like that on several different facades, and they were only allowed to have 1. And, they're making the signs small so that they don't go over the overall square footage that you're allowed, but then they're still asking for a variance for the number of signs because, they're visible 360 degrees based on where you're coming into the site. And yeah, they just need a different type of signage than just the one that you would get on the front of a storefront in a shopping center. So yeah, absolutely. We're thinking about that, and we're working on developing what we think are some sensible regulations.
So, Joe, before you go off, we can't regulate based on use, because that would be content, right?
No, not by use, no.
Right,
no.
so, and I don't know if this is up and coming, but have you thought about how, like, the multi-use type, how we might address those as well, while we're on the subject of that? If we've got, our Rochester, or Main Street, we've got a business below and the
Yes,
apartments above,
yep.
and how we might address those things.
Right, if you have a small office on the upper floor.
Right, or
yeah, exactly.
even on, Main Street down south of 14, I know that there are offices up there. There might be multiple facilities in there, and if they were only allowed one sign, are we accommodating more than one business?
Right, yeah, and that's an important thing to do, right? So yes, right now the city center district does have some standards for that kind of thing, but we're looking at it to make sure it's adequate. But yes, absolutely. Sometimes you'll have multiple users in a building, or office building especially, right? You might have 4 suites in an office building. So yes, we are considering that as well. Because, yeah, the one sign standard just might not work for that. Just making a note. You guys are asking good questions. It's like you're on a planning commission or something.
What, as opposed to normally?
But yes, I think the next discussion we have on this is going to be really interesting for all of you, because it does address a lot of some of this stuff, and yeah, we're going to get really deep into sizes and numbers and which facade of the building and all that stuff. And I'll make sure to have some visual aids for the screen for that one, because it's going to be pretty important to be able to see what we're talking about. But are there any other questions about what we've talked about tonight? Any other thoughts?
I do.
Okay.
And I don't know, again, if this was, maybe I looked it over, or maybe it's coming soon. Canopy and awning signs, I know that, is that something we'll discuss further?
Yes,
Okay.
they're addressed in the next batch of
Okay,
content that you're
cool.
getting. Yep. And we have standards for those.
Are we going to specifically address corporate logos?
So they're addressed in the current sign ordinance. And
As a sign?
the standard is that you're not allowed to have more than 50% of a sign be occupied by a logo. That's the standard right now. I think that it's a somewhat problematic standard from several standpoints, not least of which is what qualifies as a logo.
Right,
If you have an
McDonald's is a whole logo.
entirely typographic logo, in Farmington Hills, I work in Farmington Hills, there's a company called Mahle. They're a big industrial company. I don't know what they make, but they make a lot of stuff. Their logo is MAHLE in a custom typeface. Their sign is their logo. Like, it's 100% their logo. So a business that's in that position where their logo is entirely typographic, if you have a standard that the logo can only be 50% of the sign, you're creating a major problem for them. And, like, I look at the Taco Bell sign, not the ones on the building, but the one on the pole. The bell is their logo. Are the words Taco Bell their logo too? They are. Their graphic standards department would tell you they are. But if the sign doesn't say Taco Bell, I mean, other than looking at the building, you wouldn't know what it is, right? I mean, I think everybody knows what a Taco Bell looks like, but it's probably a bad example. But nevertheless, it needs to be able to say Taco Bell. And Yeah, the logo question is a tricky thing because, on the one hand, if you have, like let's say you've got a restaurant chain and its logo is somebody's, a caricature of somebody's face. There are restaurants that have logos like that, and the sign is just the face. It's pretty easy to say, yes, that is a logo. The whole sign is a logo. But it's when you get into that mix of type and icon or just type that it becomes a much tougher thing to impose upon someone because you're literally telling him you can't put the expression of your business's name on a sign and have it take up the whole sign. So my inclination is to lean away from disallowing a logo to be the sign. But there may be some things that we can do to,
Wouldn't it be up to the
avoid.
discretionary of the business? I would think, like a logo, like you just said, especially as logos evolve, they are the business. Like,
Right, exactly, yeah.
Shouldn't we leave that up to a discretion of them?
That's what I think ultimately.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's not what your ordinance does right now. Your ordinance prohibits a sign that's just a logo. But it doesn't say what logo means.
Right, because really the McDonald's, I know it's a bad example, but like when I think of kids in environmental print, that's one of the first things they'll learn is like, they know that means McDonald's,
Golden
even though they
arches.
can't read McDonald's, right? Because that is a logo, but that's also the name of the business. So one could argue that comes with, exposure and, name recognition. So like, who are we to decide if their name is recognized enough, right?
Right, and that's how I tend to view it. I think that we're getting away from content in general. That's a content regulation to say that only up to 50% of the sign can be a logo. And we're probably on more solid ground there because it's commercial speech, and there's still, per Central Hudson, a minor difference between commercial speech and non-commercial speech, according to the Supreme Court. But nevertheless, I don't feel like any kind of content regulation is somewhere we ought to be at this point, because it just feels like it's bound to be a trouble spot in the future if it's not now. So I guess those are my thoughts on corporate logos and how they're treated in signage. I feel like it's problematic to try to regulate the amount of a sign that can be constituted by a logo, for all those reasons. And I feel like the provision that we have in the ordinance right now is problematic for those reasons.
Did you get enough out of us? Or?
It was a fantastic conversation, really, seriously. I mean it. I mean that as a compliment. That was a very good discussion.
Okay, thank you. Then we shall move on to other business.
Thank you. Forgot I was plugged in.
Do we have anything under other business?
No, other than the building report, that I sent to you, I don't think there was anything more. Were there any questions? I am gonna start modifying that a little bit. For one thing, on code enforcement, it says how many code enforcement actions there were the previous month, but then it says how many were ended that month. Well, they don't all end that quickly. Some of them go on for a time. It's just gonna be how many were cleared this year to date.
Okay.
You just change it that way, because otherwise it looks like code isn't closing out any of their actions, and they are. It's just sometimes like snow. You get so many days, then they go back, you get so many days. So those don't all quit end of month. So I'm just trying to make things a little clearer.
Okay, on the listing of development project, 400 South Main, it's noted the site plan has expired. Doesn't the site plan carry on as long as there's work being done on the site?
There's been no work.
if work stops for a length of time.
I don't know that any work started on this, on a site plan there.
Yeah, and what are we gonna do about, like, that building's just horrible.
Yeah,
There's nothing we can
Can
do?
get it on blight when that occurs, and code enforcement's pretty good about going around and looking for issues like that.
But I mean,
that's
it's been
about-
like that for at least 2-3 years. And, I mean, there's garbage in the doors. It's just a horrible-looking site.
could we
Okay.
show cause him and have him come in?
There is no, you can ask him to come in, but
'Cause
there's
it's
no
Mahmood,
action.
right?
Yeah.
That's one of
It's
his
really-
buildings?
It's
Right.
really it's a code enforcement action.
Okay, 331 North Main, that's the chicken down here. I noticed they're mowing the front lawn, but the backyard is really overgrown. That should be looked at. There's really
Okay.
getting tall.
Which one?
The chicken, right down
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
there.
Their
And,
engineering is now done, so they are ready to rock and roll.
good.
Yep.
And the other one is temporary certificates of occupancy, 288 West 14 Mile, Didi's Vintage. It says it's in effect through 6/30 of 2022. How long is the temporary certificate? I thought that we were going to see her in here.
We don't call them in here, they, because the TCOs are not the purview of the planning commission. But we have been working with her. She's gone through a few engineers trying to get people to, first of all, it's hard to get an engineer for a small job, and then she's got one, and then to get them to jump on something. So we've been continuously having meetings with her. I just had a communication from her today that said she has sent her CAD file to a new engineer, and I'm going to be asking her for some sort of update from them, so that we just want to make sure it's continually moving forward.
Yeah, she's been in
Is
there
it
for quite
280? Are we talking about 288?
Yeah.
Didi's.
Yeah.
Didi's,
It
okay.
used to be Tribal
Yep.
Fair.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we're
Tribal-
keeping track on it and
Tribal
continually.
Fair never completed their site plan. They did half of it, and then they moved out. So Didi's has to complete the other half of it.
Well, they're not completing that site plan.
Not that site, they're gonna have their own site plan, yeah.
Yes, and
Right.
it's really more of an engineering plan. It's gonna be the parking lot and driveway.
I just hope that
She's
we
not
can-
modifying the building.
I just hope we can bring them in here and rather than just keep giving them extensions on
Well,
their.
again, we're keeping them,
Certificate.
we're keeping in contact with them and
Yeah.
keeping the tether there and working with them, so.
Okay, very good. Anything else on the
Yeah.
agenda?
Yeah, I have one. The church, so what's going on with them? I noticed it just still seems like it's the same mess that he told us that he was gonna be working on.
We've got a site plan and it's good for 6 months, so he's still open. And he's on my list to call Pastor Bob
How
and
can he
find
still
out.
be open? He was in front of us well before January.
I don't think his site plan was completed. We're going from the date it was actually completed. But he's on my list to call Scott. I'll check in with them. Last I talked to them, they had wanted to make a few changes to the site plan, some very minor things that as they had gotten into construction, it would make sense to do. It was minor stuff. Then, he's dealing with a lot of volunteers and church members who then don't understand the whole process of what they had to go to get here. And they're now saying, how about if we change this? How about if we change that? Maybe you could do this. And so he's been in the process of kind of trying to corral that we spent a lot of money and time to get to this point. We don't just say, let's just rip that up and start over. So I'll check in with Pastor Bob and see how
It
he's
looks like they
doing.
changed the light fixture in the parking lot. That's the only change I think I've seen there.
Yeah, and he said he'd have some of it done before the winter rolled in. That
Yeah.
didn't get done. I mean, it's just frustrating.
He also said he was gonna come in and give us updates too, but, hasn't done that either.
I don't think he may have said that. He's not actually required to, but he's still within his time frame. But just to see if we can help him out, I kind of just call now and then to say, how are you doing, and see where we can go.
I'll say a
On the
prayer
next-
prayer that he comes in, yeah.
On this next report that you're putting together, can you put when his
what he's
business,
doing?
his what?
Update on what he's doing.
Yeah,
or-
now, well, not an update as much as when does that permit expire?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take a look at that, Scott.
Thanks, Joe.
Yep, no problem.
Hey, how is Rochester Road, our, I forget the number, no.
That's with-
I noticed the sign, it seems like it was back up, or maybe it's just me, the for sale sign. Caregivers?
650?
Yeah.
There, yeah.
We don't actually know, we haven't had any communication from them,
No.
but they've
Right.
not come in for any permits. And they do appear to have listed the property again.
Yeah.
So I am guessing the project has been dropped.
Okay.
That's what it seems like.
That was the
Seems like
marijuana
we
distillery?
talked to somebody that
Caregiver?
was,
Yeah.
we did talk to two different people who were questioning zoning and what could happen there. So that's as far as we know, is that apparently they're
New
making a
prospects that were
change.
questioning zoning? Like new people?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, and then, do you know, I know that we can't zone for 5G. Are there 5G things going on? Is there anything that residents, are there any things that let residents know if there's 5G things going up along their property lines where the city has easement or anything like that?
I think there would probably be a DPW question. It's-
That's
They
DPW?
don't, yeah, we don't know where they're, Nick might.
I can shed a little bit of light on that. So, back in 2020, I believe that's when the city approved an ordinance, but essentially it doesn't do much. So, the utility companies have the ability to use those poles in the right of way. So all they have to do is pull a right of way permit. So same thing if they were going to go dig up to put new piping underneath the road, they just have to get a right of way permit. A lot of the qualifications with 5G has to deal with the state and federal government. They didn't give a lot of authority to cities to limit this, and so we don't necessarily have the ability to inform residents where that's going in. It's basically all tasked with the utility companies.
Well, is there a way for okay, well, right-of-way permit would make it seem like there is a way to trigger some type of correspondence. And I'm not saying it's on the city or anything like that, but just some type of correspondence, is that not possible?
I mean, so when they apply for right-of-way permit, it's just for doing the work in the right-of-way. It's not necessarily, and then there comes a case, how do we notify, who do we notify? Is that necessarily our responsibility
Right.
to do? And I think I saw what you were talking about, and I ended up having a conversation with that woman, and she understood, and it's just an unfortunate case of the state not giving any authority to municipalities to govern that.
Well, yeah, absolutely, I completely agree. And again, I'm not saying this is the city's fault, I'm just trying to help kind of maybe inform people. Do you know of anything that residents might be able to go to so they can see where the utility companies are selling, what poles are selling these 5Gs to, or anything like that?
Right now, no.
Okay.
I'm not saying there won't be in the future. I know that we'll have some more resources available on 5G because it's not going away.
Yeah.
So we'll see if we can get some information on our website, and as stuff comes out, we'll get it out there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Done.
Number 10, planners report.
I didn't have anything further this evening.
Nothing on planning. Staff report and training opportunities, that was part of our packet. It's all listed in there. See no attorney, so I don't think we have any legal update. If no one else has anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Support.
And motion support, roll call, please.
Mr. Fitzer,
Yes.
Mr. Kucera,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Sanaki,
Yes.
Mr. Watson.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.